My grandson said it so loudly that people at the next table turned to look. "Grandma, you're embarrassing." The words weren't shouted, but they were sharp enough to cut through the noise of the crowded restaurant, sharp enough to lodge themselves deep in my chest. His face was red, his eyes darting around as if my very presence had become something he needed to apologize for. I froze, my hands still wrapped around my glass of water, my mouth slightly open because I had just been in the middle of telling him how proud I was of him. Embarrassing. I didn't know what hurt more, the word itself or the way he wouldn't look at me after he said it. We were there to celebrate his high school graduation. My daughter had chosen the restaurant, a nice one. White tablecloths, soft music, families dressed in their best clothes, balloons tied to chairs that said "Congrats" in bright letters. Everyone was smiling, laughing, taking pictures. Everyone except me. I looked at my grandson, Tyler, sitting across from me in his graduation gown, already half unzipped, his cap tossed onto the empty chair beside him. Just a few minutes earlier, he had been grinning, showing off his diploma, letting his friends snap photos of him on their phones. And now he couldn't even look at me. My daughter Melissa was sitting next to him. She let out a nervous laugh and said, "Tyler, don't be rude," but there was no real scolding in her voice. More like she hoped the moment would pass if she pretended it wasn't that bad. My son-in-law stared at his menu like it had suddenly become the most interesting thing in the world. No one said anything else. The silence stretched. I felt every eye at our table shift toward me, waiting for my reaction, waiting to see if the old woman would make a scene. I didn't. I simply nodded. "Oh," I said quietly, "I'm sorry, sweetheart, I didn't mean to." I picked up my purse slowly, so my hands wouldn't shake too much. I stood up, smoothing my sweater like I always do when I'm nervous, and gave them a small smile. "I think I'll head home," I said. "You all enjoy yourselves." Melissa finally looked at me then. "Mom, you don't have to go, he didn't mean it like that." But Tyler still wouldn't meet my eyes. I knew what he meant. "I'll be fine," I said. "This is your day." And with that, I turned and walked out. No tears. No raised voice. No argument. Just an old woman leaving a restaurant full of celebration, stepping back into the quiet she knew so well. The air outside was cooler, the late afternoon sun already dipping low. I stood there for a moment on the sidewalk, my chest tight, my heart pounding, trying to steady my breathing. Through the window, I could see them again, already leaning toward each other, already moving on. Like I had never been there at all. I walked to my car, unlocked it, and sat behind the wheel without turning the key. My hands rested in my lap, and that's when they started to shake. Not with anger. With heartbreak. Because that wasn't just a grandson snapping at his grandmother. That was the sound of a lifetime of being slowly pushed to the side, finally spoken out loud. My name is Margaret Wilson. I am 78 years old. I am a widow, a mother, a grandmother. And until that day I thought that no matter how small my world became, at least my family still wanted me in it. I was wrong. The drive home was a blur. I don't even remember most of it. The familiar streets passed by, the trees, the houses, the little grocery store on the corner. All the places I had known for years, all the places where no one knew what had just happened to me. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked the same as it always did. Quiet, still, waiting. I went inside, locked the door behind me, and leaned my back against it for a moment, finally letting the tears come. They fell silently. No sobbing, no sound, just tears slipping down my cheeks as I stared at the hallway where family photos hung on the wall. Pictures of Melissa as a little girl with missing teeth and messy hair. Pictures of Tyler as a baby in my arms. Pictures of my husband, Robert, smiling in a way that always made me feel safe. I whispered I didn't mean to embarrass him, to no one at all. Then I walked into the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea, and sat at the small table by the window, just like I did every evening. The house was quiet. It had been quiet for a long time. But that night it felt louder than ever. My phone didn't ring that night. Not from Melissa. Not from Tyler. No text saying, "Are you okay?" No quick apology. No awkward message trying to smooth it over. Just silence. I sat at the kitchen table until my tea went cold. Then I rinsed the mug and put it in the drying rack like I always do, careful and quiet, as if the normal routine could protect me from what I was feeling. Then I went to bed early, not because I was tired, but because being awake in that house felt like sitting in a room with a wound. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tyler's face. The way he'd glanced around the restaurant, like he was afraid someone he knew would see him with me. Like being near me was something that lowered his value. Like my age was contagious. I kept replaying the moment, searching it for a mistake I had made. Was I talking too loudly? Was I asking too many questions? Was my sweater too plain? My hair too grey? My hands too spotted? Was it the way I laughed, the way I sometimes forget I'm not the person I used to be? And underneath all that, a deeper question. How long had he been feeling that way? Because you don't say something like that out of nowhere. That kind of cruelty doesn't come from a single moment. It comes from a growing impatience, from embarrassment that has been fed quietly over time, from a habit of seeing someone as less. The next morning, I woke up with puffy eyes and an ache in my chest that made me sit still for a moment and listen to my own breathing. I told myself to get up, to move, to not let myself sink into the old familiar sadness that can swallow you whole if you let it. So I made coffee instead of tea because coffee feels stronger, like a small act of defiance. I opened the curtains and let the sunlight in, and I told myself this is one day, just one ugly moment. Families say things, teenagers say things, he's young, he'll regret it. But even as I thought it, I didn't quite believe it. Because it wasn't just Tyler. It never is. Tyler was only the one who finally said it out loud. When my husband Robert was alive, this house was fuller. Even if no one visited, even if the phone stayed quiet, I had him. We had our routines, we had our little jokes. We had evenings where we sat together watching the news, complaining about the world, feeling like we were still part of it. He used to say, "As long as we've got each other, we're fine." Then cancer took him, slow at first, then fast at the end. The kind of illness that doesn't just steal someone's body but steals the future you thought you were walking toward. After he died, everything changed, not all at once, but steadily. Like a dimmer switch turning the light down on my life. At first, Melissa came around often. She brought casseroles. She sat at this very kitchen table with me and cried. She promised we'd get through it. Tyler was only 10 then. He hugged me awkwardly, patting my shoulder like I might break. He used to sit on the living room floor and play video games while Melissa and I talked, the sound of his laughter mixing with the sound of my grief, and for a while it helped. But then life pulled them away again. Tyler got older. Sports, friends, school, Melissa got busier. Work errands, the endless motion of raising a child in a world that never slows down. Visits became shorter, then less frequent, then mostly holidays, then mostly phone calls. And I adapted. That's what mothers do. That's what grandmothers do. We shrink our needs down until they fit in whatever space our family has left for us. We tell ourselves we're lucky for whatever scraps of time we get. We learn not to ask for too much, because asking feels like begging, and begging feels like losing. Still, I tried. I tried to be the kind of grandmother Tyler would be proud of. I bought him gifts I could barely afford. I showed up to his games, sitting in the bleachers with the other parents even though I didn't always understand what was happening. I clapped too loudly sometimes because I wanted him to know I was there. I brought him little snacks afterward, the way my mother used to do for me. He used to smile then, used to roll his eyes in that playful way teenagers do, but he'd still take the snack, still say, "Thanks, Grandma." But as he got older, something shifted. He started answering my questions with one-word replies. Started looking at his phone while I spoke. Started acting like my presence was something to manage. Melissa would say, "He's just at that age." And maybe that was true, maybe it was normal. But I noticed the way she started doing it too, in small ways. The way she'd check her phone while I talked. The way she'd sigh when I asked if they were free on a Sunday. The way she'd say, "Mom, you worry too much," when I asked questions any mother would ask. It was like they were slowly training me to be smaller, to take up less space. The worst part is I let them. Because I didn't want to lose what little connection I still had. That's how it happens, I think, not with a big dramatic moment, but with 1,000 small ones that teach you your place. And then that day at the restaurant, Tyler just said it. "Grandma, you're embarrassing." I kept seeing his face. Not angry, not cruel in a dramatic way, just impatient. Like I was an inconvenience, like I was ruining the image of himself he wanted the world to see. What he didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that I wasn't just an old woman showing up to a graduation dinner. I was the reason Melissa finished nursing school. I was the reason their lights stayed on during the hardest year of their marriage. I was the one who emptied my savings quietly so my grandson could have the things he never knew he needed. I was the one who watched Tyler after school for years, who packed his lunches, who sat up late helping him with projects, who picked him up when Melissa couldn't, who showed up when everyone else was too busy. And I never said a word about any of it. Because love isn't supposed to keep score. But that night, sitting alone with my cold tea and my aching heart, I found myself thinking something I had never allowed myself to think before. Maybe they don't know me at all. Maybe they only know what they've been given, not what it cost. I stood up from the table, walked down the hallway and opened the closet in the spare room where I kept an old metal box. A box full of papers I rarely touched. Receipts, old bank statements, letters, things I kept because I didn't know where else to put them because my generation doesn't throw away proof. I pulled it out and carried it to the living room, setting it on the coffee table in front of me. The lid was cold under my fingers. I opened it. Inside were the pieces of a story my family had never heard. A loan agreement I'd signed when Melissa and her husband almost lost their house. A copy of a check I'd written for Tyler's braces, receipts for school trips, tuition help, sports equipment, and tucked in the bottom, yellowed and folded, a letter from the bank about my retirement account. There it was in ink, clear as day, a number that had once made me feel safe. And another number after the withdrawals. The difference between the life I could have had and the life I gave them instead. I stared at those papers for a long time, feeling something unfamiliar rise in me. Not anger. Not vengeance. Just a quiet, steady clarity. Because for the first time, I saw the truth as plainly as those numbers. They had been living their lives, growing up, moving forward, and I had been quietly paying the price behind the scenes. And still, they saw me as embarrassing. I closed the box slowly and sat back, my hands resting on my knees, my heart beating hard in my chest. I didn't want to punish anyone. But I suddenly realized I couldn't keep letting myself be treated like something small. The next day, Melissa finally called. Her voice was bright, casual, like she wanted to pretend the night before hadn't happened. "Hey, Mom," she said. "How are you feeling?" I held the phone in my hand and looked out the window at my quiet street. A bird hopped along the sidewalk, pecking at something invisible. The world didn't care what had happened to me. "I'm fine," I almost said out of habit. But the words stopped in my throat. Because I was tired of being fine. Tired of being easy. Tired of being the one who swallows the hurt, so everyone else can keep eating dinner like nothing happened. So instead I said very softly, "Melissa, we need to talk." And for the first time in a long time, my voice didn't sound small. There was a pause on the line. Not a long one. Just long enough for me to know she hadn't expected that. "About what?" Melissa asked. I stayed quiet for a moment, letting my thoughts settle, letting my heartbeat slow. I could hear faint noises on her end, the sound of traffic, the hum of her car. She was probably driving somewhere, fitting me into another corner of her busy day. "About yesterday," I said, "about what Tyler said, and about a lot of things before that." She sighed, not loudly, not in a way she'd admit was annoyance, but I heard it anyway. Mom, he didn't mean it. You know how teenagers are. He was just nervous and you were talking a little loud, that's all. Talking a little loud. That was all. I closed my eyes. Melissa, I said, do you think it's okay for him to talk to me that way? There was another pause, then she said, of course not, I told him not to be rude. But you didn't make him apologize, I said quietly. She didn't answer right away. I didn't want to make a scene on his big day, she finally said. I felt something twist inside me. So it was better to make one with me, I said, not accusing, just stating it as it was. Mom, that's not fair. Isn't it? I asked. Her voice softened then, the way it always did when she wanted to calm me down. You know he loves you, he just gets embarrassed easily. Kids at that age care about what people think. I thought about that. About how much I had cared what people thought too, how I had dressed carefully, spoken carefully, laughed quietly, shrunk myself slowly over the years so I wouldn't stand out, so I wouldn't be a problem, so I wouldn't be embarrassing. And what about what I think? I asked. Does that matter at all? That caught her off guard. Of course it does, she said, but her voice wasn't as certain as the words. Then why didn't anyone ask if I was okay? I said. Why did I drive home alone and sit in my house all night without a single call? There it was. The thing that had hurt almost as much as Tyler's words. I thought you wanted space, she said. You left so quickly. I left because I was hurt, I said. There's a difference. She was quiet again. I could almost see her gripping the steering wheel, frowning, trying to decide how much of this she really wanted to hear. Mom, she said slowly, I don't know what you want me to say. I took a breath. I don't want excuses, I said. I just want you to understand I don't feel like I matter anymore. I feel like I'm something you all manage, not someone you really see. Her voice dropped. That's not true. But it feels true, I said, and feelings come from somewhere. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then she said, I'm sorry you feel that way. That old phrase. I'm sorry you feel that way. Not I'm sorry I hurt you. Just I'm sorry that you feel hurt. It stung but I didn't push it, not yet. I'm not calling to fight, I said. I just want things to change. I don't want to keep pretending everything is fine when it is. She exhaled slowly. What do you want, Mom? The question hung in the air. What did I want? I thought about it. About how many years I had spent wanting nothing out loud. Wanting to be easy. Wanting to be low maintenance. Wanting to be the kind of mother and grandmother who never asked for more than a quick call and a holiday visit. I want respect, I said finally. And I want honesty from you, from Tyler, from everyone. I can talk to him, she said. I'll make him apologize. I shook my head even though she couldn't see me. I don't want a forced apology. I want him to understand why what he said was wrong. And how do you want me to do that? She asked. I looked toward the living room, at the metal box still sitting on the coffee table where I had left it the night before. I think it's time you knew some things, I said. Things I never told you, about how much help I've really given you, and what it's cost me. Her voice sharpened slightly. What do you mean? I mean, I said gently, that there's a story about my life you've never heard, and I think it's time you did. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, Are you saying this is about money? It's about more than money, I said, but money is part of it. Another silence. Then she said, Okay, what are you saying? I took a deep breath. I'm saying I'd like you and Tyler to come over, I said. Not to celebrate, not for dinner, just to talk. When? She asked. Soon, I said, before we all pretend this never happened. She hesitated, then said, All right, this weekend. Thank you, I said. We hung up not with warmth but with something new. A sense that the quiet between us was about to be broken. That evening, I took the metal box and placed it carefully into my closet again. But this time, I didn't hide it behind old coats and shoes. I put it right in front where I could reach it. I sat at my kitchen table with my tea, the lamplight soft around me, and I waited. Not for a phone call. Not for an apology. But for the moment I would finally stop being invisible. They came on Saturday afternoon. I watched from the window as Melissa's car pulled into the driveway, the front wheels crunching softly over the gravel. For a moment I just stood there, my hands resting on the back of the chair, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. Part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't home. Part of me wanted to go lie down and let the day pass like any other. But I didn't. I walked to the door and opened it before they even had a chance to knock. Melissa stood there with her purse on her shoulder, a tight smile on her face, the kind she wears when she's bracing herself. Tyler was beside her, taller than I remembered, his graduation cap gone now, his hair still neatly styled, his eyes flicking past me into the house as if he didn't quite want to be there. "Hi, Mom," Melissa said. "Hi," I replied, "come in." They stepped inside and the house, which had been so quiet all week, suddenly felt smaller, fuller, not with noise but with tension. We moved into the living room and they sat on the couch while I took my usual chair across from them. For a few seconds no one spoke. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, filling the space we were all afraid to touch. Finally Melissa cleared her throat. "So, you said you wanted to talk." "Yes," I said, "I did." Tyler stared at his hands. He hadn't looked at me since he walked in. I took a slow breath. "Before I say anything else, I want to know something. Tyler, do you understand why I left the restaurant the other day?" He shrugged slightly. "I guess." "That's not an answer," I said gently. He shifted in his seat. "I mean, I know I hurt your feelings." My chest tightened. "It wasn't just my feelings," I said, "it was my dignity." He looked up then, just for a second, surprise flickering across his face. "I didn't mean it like that," he muttered. "Then how did you mean it?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, Everyone was looking. My friends were there. You were asking questions and talking about when I was little, and I didn't want to look like a kid in front of them." I nodded slowly. "So you made me feel small instead." Melissa opened her mouth. "Mom." I lifted a hand. "Let me finish." She closed it again. "I want you both to hear something," I said. "Not to argue with it, not to explain it away, just hear it." They both looked at me then. "I have spent the last 20 years trying not to take up too much space in your lives," I continued. "I learned not to call too often, not to ask for too much, not to complain. I learned to smile and say I'm fine even when I wasn't, because I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to be embarrassing." Tyler's eyes dropped again. "When your father died," I said to Melissa, "I told myself my job was to help you stand on your own. And I did, quietly. Every time you needed me, I was there. I never kept score, I never asked for thanks, because that's what love does." I leaned forward and reached for the metal box I had placed beside my chair before they arrived. "This," I said, setting it on the coffee table, "is the part of my life you've never seen." Melissa frowned. "What is that?" "Proof," I said simply. I opened the lid. The papers were still neatly stacked, just as I had left them. I picked up the first one and held it in my hand. "This is the loan I took out when you and Tom were about to lose your house," I said. "Do you remember that year, when the hospital cut your hours and everything felt like it was falling apart?" Melissa's eyes widened. "You said it was just a little help, that you had it saved." "I did," I said, "and then I didn't." I placed it down and picked up another paper. "This is the check for Tyler's braces." Another. "And this was for his class trip to Washington." Another. "And this one helped pay for his soccer camp." Tyler looked up now, his brow furrowed. "Mom said you just wanted to help, that you liked doing it." "I did," I said. "I loved helping, I still would, but you need to understand what that meant." I lifted the last paper, the bank statement. "This," I said, my voice softer now, "was my retirement account. The one your grandfather and I spent our whole lives building so we wouldn't have to worry when we got old. I showed them the number at the top, then the one at the bottom. Melissa leaned forward, her hand flying to her mouth. Mom, I didn't know. No, I said, you didn't because I never told you. I didn't want you to feel guilty. I didn't want you to think I expected anything in return. I looked at Tyler. But what I didn't expect, I said quietly, was to be treated like I don't matter at all. The room was silent. Tyler stared at the papers, then at me, his face slowly changing. The impatience was gone. The defensiveness was gone. What was left looked a lot like shame. You did all that for us, he asked. Yes, I said. His voice cracked. I had no idea. I know, I replied. That's why I'm telling you now. Melissa shook her head slowly, tears welling in her eyes. Mom, I thought you were okay. You always said you were okay. I said it because it was easier than telling you the truth, I said, and because I didn't want to lose what little space I still had in your lives. She reached for my hand. You never had to do that. I squeezed her fingers, but I did, and I don't want to anymore. Tyler stood up suddenly and walked over to me. He stopped in front of my chair, his shoulders stiff, his hands clenched at his sides. Grandma, he said, his voice low, I'm so sorry, I didn't think, I didn't know. Tears ran down his cheeks now, and he didn't bother wiping them away. I didn't mean to make you feel like that, he said. I swear, I was just being stupid. I didn't think about what you've done for us, or about how it would feel. I looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw not the young man who had embarrassed me, but the little boy who used to run into my arms after school. I don't need you to feel guilty, I said. I just need you to remember that I'm a person, not a background piece in your life, not someone you hide when it's inconvenient. He nodded, crying openly now. I won't forget, I promise. He leaned down and hugged me, careful, awkward but real. And I hugged him back, my arms wrapping around his shoulders, feeling something in my chest finally loosen. Melissa joined us, kneeling beside my chair, her arms around both of us. I'm so sorry, Mom, she whispered. I should have seen it, I should have protected you. I closed my eyes. We're here now, I said, that's what matters. We stayed like that for a long moment, 3 generations tangled together in a quiet living room full of old photos and soft light. After that, the tension eased, not completely. Things like this don't disappear in an instant, but the air felt lighter. We sat back down, and for the first time in a long while we talked. Not about schedules, not about errands, but about real things, about how lonely it gets, about how fast life moves, about how easy it is to forget the people who made it possible. Before they left, Tyler looked at me and said, Can I come by next week? Just to hang out. Maybe you can tell me some stories about Grandpa. I smiled. I'd like that. When the door closed behind them and their car pulled away, the house became quiet again. But it wasn't the same quiet. I went back to the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea, and sat at my little table by the window. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor, warm and gentle. I held the mug in both hands and let the warmth sink into my fingers. For the first time since that day at the restaurant, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. And I knew this. Sometimes, leaving without a word is the only way to make people finally hear you. If you want me to keep going with a softer, reflective closing that stretches the ending and brings the story fully home, just say the word. The days after that felt different. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just different. Tyler did come by the next week, just like he said he would. He showed up with a small paper bag from the bakery down the street and an awkward smile on his face, like he wasn't sure if he still had the right to be there. I brought muffins, he said. Mom said you like blueberry. I do, I said, stepping aside to let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same little table where I'd spent so many quiet afternoons, and this time there was someone across from me again. He asked about Grandpa, about how we met, about what he was like when he was young. And I told him stories I hadn't told in years, about dances in the high school gym, about Robert fixing cars in the driveway, about how he used to whistle while he worked, even when money was tight. Tyler listened, really listened. No phone in his hand. No rushing. Just a young man learning that his grandmother had been someone long before she became just Grandma. He started coming by more often after that, not every day, not even every week sometimes, but often enough that I stopped being surprised when I heard a knock at the door. Sometimes it was just for half an hour, sometimes longer. Sometimes he brought homework and asked me to quiz him, laughing when I corrected him like I used to when he was little. Melissa changed too. She called more, not just to check in but to talk, to ask how my day really was. To tell me when she was tired or worried instead of always pretending everything was fine. And sometimes, on Sundays, she'd bring dinner over and we'd eat together at my table, squeezing plates into the small space, laughing about how we used to complain that it was too crowded. One evening, as we were washing dishes side by side, she said quietly, "I didn't realize how much I leaned on you, Mom. How much I still do. I'm sorry I didn't see it." I shrugged gently. We don't always see the strongest things because they don't ask to be seen. She hugged me then, right there by the sink, and for a moment I felt like her mother again, not just someone she managed in the background of her life. The metal box stayed in my closet after that. I didn't take it out again, I didn't need to. Its job was done, not to shame anyone, not to demand anything, just to tell a story that had been hidden too long. And life went on. My house was still quiet most evenings. I still made tea and sat by the window, watching the light fade and the shadows stretch across the floor. I still missed Robert. I still had moments when loneliness crept in, when the walls felt too close and the memories too loud. But now the quiet wasn't empty, because it held the echo of laughter from earlier in the week. Because it held the promise of another visit. Because it held the knowledge that I wasn't invisible anymore. Sometimes I think back to that moment at the restaurant. To the white tablecloths. The balloons. The hum of celebration. To Tyler's voice, sharp and careless, "Grandma, you're embarrassing." And I realize something. If he hadn't said it. If I hadn't stood up and walked out. If I hadn't gone home and finally opened that box. None of this would have happened. I would have kept smiling. Kept shrinking. Kept telling myself I was fine. And they would have kept believing it. Walking out that day wasn't about anger. It was about finally choosing myself. So if there's anything I've learned, anything I would pass on to anyone listening to my story, it's this. Don't wait until you feel invisible to speak. Don't swallow hurt just to keep the peace. And don't be afraid to leave the table if staying there means losing yourself. Sometimes the quietest exit is the loudest truth. My grandson said, "Grandma, you're embarrassing," at his graduation. So I left without a word. And only then did they finally learn the truths.